Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Walker. I'm Amanda Hunt, Head of Public Engagement, Learning, and Impact. We're all so excited to welcome you here tonight for this evening's Mack lecture. The Mack lecture series is an exploration of contemporary cultural moments through what we hope are inspiring lectures and conversations by people working at the highest level of their field. We invite folks from all over, writers, thinkers, and artists as well, to this podium to share what they're thinking through, how they're changing, what we're experiencing in the world, and sometimes assessing it in real time. So it's also my pleasure to acknowledge tonight Aaron and Carol Mack, who are here with us. Aaron and Carol are longtime supporters of The Walker. The Walker and the Twin Cities arts ecosystem more broadly. I'm sure you've seen them all everywhere. They're advocates for the kind of creative change-making that's truly at the heart of this series, and their generous support is what makes tonight and these conversations possible. So Aaron and Carol, thank you. I can't see you, but I'm thanking you. There you are. Tonight, we welcome Kara Walker back to The Walker. Marking a historic moment for us. I'm looking at you. Kara was commissioned to make work in Richard Flood's No Place Like Home in 1997. Then in 2007, The Walker and curator Philippe Verne organized her first large survey exhibition, Kara Walker, My Compliment, My Enemy, My Oppressor, My Love, which traveled to museums in Paris, New York, and Los Angeles. The Kara Walker artist page is still one of our most trafficked and highest yielding searches on our website. Just a fun fact, it makes me laugh every time. And tonight, this rich history of Kara's practice, the arc of it, the monumentality of her work is why we really wanted to bring her back to Minneapolis in this moment. Her work includes major public commissions that have greatly impacted dialogue of contemporary art over the last few decades, and reflecting on our times and the meaning of monuments as historical markers in this moment. Kara's work and her contributions to the recent monument show that just closed at MoCA and the Brick in Los Angeles are some of the framing for tonight's talk and subsequent dialogue. For those of you who aren't as versed in her practice, Kara is widely regarded as one of the most influential American artists of our time. Over the past 30 years, Walker has developed a singular visual language spanning silhouette, installation, painting, and moving image. Widely exhibited worldwide, her work examines the enduring entanglements of race, gender, sexuality, and violence in the U.S. She has been honored with numerous awards, including the MacArthur Fellowship and the Eileen Harris Norton Fellowship. Her work is held in major collections across the world, including the Guggenheim, MoMA, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Tate Modern in London, and so on. And Walker's large-scale public projects, including A Subtlety in 2014, which changed my life. I've been waiting to tell you that. Her monumental installation at the abandoned Domino Sugar Factory in Brooklyn. Her newly commissioned and absolutely wild installation, Fortuna and the Immortality Garden Machine, is currently on view for a few more weeks at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. After Kara's talk tonight, she will be joined on stage by Deanna Cummings for a bit of a fireside chat. And briefly, Deanna is the Arts and Culture Program Director at the McKnight Foundation. She's a social artist. She is a champion of Minnesota artists and works to ensure that they have the support that they need to thrive. She's a co-founder and former CEO of Juxtaposition Arts, a groundbreaking social enterprise in North Minneapolis, which has, since 1995, guided and supported the neighborhood's youth toward creative careers and higher education. She brings both national perspective and deep local commitment to her work. Cummings has served as a program officer for the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council and as a senior administrator for the Council on Black Minnesotans. She serves as chair of the Bush Foundation's Board of Trustees and has been widely recognized for her leadership. I'd say that Cummings has built a career rooted in equity and public service, putting the arts and our communities first. So without further ado, please first join me in welcoming Kara Walker to the stage.
Thank you. One moment. Oops. Well, I was going to use a timer, but I think that's gone by the wayside, so bear with me. Thank you for having me back. I have a nice long history with the Walker Art Center, and it lives in my heart in a really special place. So thank you. And thank you for the lovely introduction, and happy birthday. So I'm going to start late in the game. I am not here to do a full overview of the arc of my career. I'm really here today to sort of talk about a very particular moment in the last 12 years of my working life. Because maybe many of you know, maybe some of you don't, I really started as a painter and printmaker, working two-dimensionally, and moved into sort of installation work with the silhouette work. And then from there, I've been playing with form. But it wasn't until 2014 that I was asked by Creative Time in New York to try my hand at a large-scale public commission. And so for the first time, I really had to think not just about what an audience is, because I think that a lot of my silhouette work and installation work does kind of demand a lot of an audience, but this is like, what does a public mean, and what does it mean to make public art, and what are my prejudices and hang-ups around public art. So this, I'm just going to show a short clip of, and I will keep it low and talk over it, because this is a clip from a film that I made on the last day of the installation. I'm sorry, I'm a little froggy and a little coarse in doing these talks. But as you can see, it's a very large space, a former sugar factory or sugar shed, and it's filled with the residue of sugar production. And one of the things that I really had to do beyond thinking about the public is, what is my work in relation to the public, and what is my work in relation to the history of this space. And so it was really challenging myself in a lot of fronts, just intellectually, how do I research this, and how does this resonate or not resonate with my work. And ultimately, after reading an important work by sociologists and say social archaeologist Sidney Mintz, a book called, oh my God, I didn't write it down, so I'm forgetting right now. A book about the history of the sugar from time immemorial, and sugar in the New World. I realized that what I needed to do was make something that was iconic and grand and funny, and ultimately that would keep people kind of moving around it. So it isn't just a sphinx, and it's not just an object made of sugar. It's also a female form. It also has these connotations of race and racist depictions of women and of African Americans. It has sexuality, but it keeps on moving, and it keeps on sort of giving something, and it gives something different to every audience member. So I wanted to film the audience engaging with it, because I felt like it had been talked about online in so many different ways, but I think one of the things I wanted to do was show Black people looking at art. People looking at art, but also people just engaging with this, it was also early in the Instagram age. It's early in like the era of people documenting everything with their phones. So I really had to think about what it is to make a work like this. And it's temporary also. So this is the question, one of the many questions. And I learned a lot of things. I'm going to move on from there because it's a long film. So I learned a lot of things around what it is I would like to do, I guess, as far as making a three-dimensional work, making a work that lives in space and that engages with the public and sort of distills histories in distills them down into an essence that can be understood, but also complicated. So the piece is called A Subtlety. It has a much longer title, but A Subtlety is a sugar sculpture. It's kind of a medieval construction that that I learned about in Sweetness and Power, the book by Sidney Mintz. Thank you. So she's about 35 feet tall. She's 75 feet long. She's constructed out of polystyrene, but then there's about 40 tons of a sugar slurry, basically a cement made of sugar and water, applied and pasted over her. And in addition, I created, with this large team that I was working with, these curios that I found on Amazon of these sort of black figurines carrying bananas and baskets and what have you. And I don't know who made them, where they come from, what their provenance is, or why they're still produced, or for whom. So I blew those up large in sort of human scale, these large 5-foot-tall children, and cast them out of sugar, or at least attempted to cast them out of sugar. The first one here was melting from the inside immediately. So they proceeded to destroy themselves over the course of the exhibition. And several of them we just cast in resin and applied sugar because it wasn't really going to work. But there were at least 4 or 5 that were cast in sugar and melted over the course, or were shattered over the course of the exhibition. So learning from that experience, I learned a few things. One is that I don't want to farm out the work entirely to a collaborative team to, build the piece. I need to have my hand in it in some way. I'm still an artist who likes to make things. I don't work with a big team normally in my own studio. So I was trying to figure out a way, when I was approached by a prospect for New Orleans, to make a piece at the site where this plaque lives in Algiers Point in New Orleans, across the river from New Orleans proper. You can see the history here. In the 1720s, at a spot of land now eroded by the river, stood the barracks where enslaved Africans from the Senegal-Gambia region were held before being ferried across the river to the slave auctions. Early Algiers Point was also the home of a slaughterhouse and a powder magazine for New Orleans, just as if enslaved Africans couldn't have their own plaque. It's not quite enough. So in the middle, across the way, is New Orleans. There's all the sites, and there's the steamboat, or riverboat, Natchez, that takes pleasure cruises. And on Natchez, as we were walking around on a site visit, having coffee somewhere, and I hear this terrible sound, a little bit like the sirens that were going off today. And it was playing You Are My Sunshine. And I thought, well, this is an interesting correlation, to be at this site of horror and, sort of a point of origin for many of us in America, and then hear this happy little song that has nothing to do with it. So the music was coming from a steam calliope, and after some investigation, I found a listserv with steam enthusiasts, and the steam enthusiasts, among them, mostly they're interested in steam engines and trains and what have you, and I found a maker who was working on a steam-powered calliope. One he had partially built in his home workshop, and he had another one on his boat. So I bought it, and then, buy first, ask questions later. And in the course of this project, I enlisted Mike Kohler, who's wearing the skull cap on, let's see, what side is he on? Your left? My left? Yes. And myself, Jason Moran, the jazz musician who you're all familiar with. And unfortunately, I've forgotten the name of my fellow who sold me so I'm a bad steward here of this piece, but we kind of fell out of touch. And I think part of the reason we fell out of touch is because of the intent of the piece. I sometimes have to defer to my other hands involved, and Mike Kohler really was instrumental in being the sort of interpreter for many people, engineers, people who make wheels, foundry guys, men who do things in their workshops. So we went out to LaPorte, Indiana, where these photos were taken, and Ari took this one, which is what we used for the brochure. It looks like I'm a Martian visiting another time. And we were standing next to a giant boiler on the sort of white object there in the calliope's in the front, and we had all this steam that we could use. So that's why we brought it out there, so we could hook it up and just go to town. In the meantime, I wanted to build a housing for this. I didn't just need it to be an object in space. So we built this, the caravan, the Katastoff caravan, it came to be known. And this is constructed out of steel and a lot of other mechanics. There's a boiler inside. There's a generator. We have to have everything housed inside of this object and the wheels. Ultimately, too heavy to really be carted around by a team of horses, and probably too expensive and impractical. But we did roll it into place at Algiers Point. After a lot of wrangling. This was probably the learning curve on doing public commissions, is ask if there's money and how much before you start. Lesson learned. So these are the sides of it. This is it in action. And then Jason came out for a couple of performances on site towards the end of the Prospect 4 exhibition. And then we have Jason up close. And next we will have the piercing sounds of Jason playing. Ultimately an answer back to the Natchez Calliope. Which I would love to get to, actually, where Jason brings it all down. He opens up all of the steam and lets it come out like this whale. It's an incredible sight, and it's an incredible sound of like the steam erupting out of this piece, and it brings everything down in a very visceral way. But it goes on quite a while. Jason is actually an amazing collaborator, because, I introduced him to a machine that doesn't operate like a piano, but has piano keys. It has a delay. It doesn't produce a clean note. And so finding ways to sort of bend the sound to, articulate this terror, the sight of terror, to kind of commemorate and celebrate and make fun of the kind of hijinks that happen in New Orleans, the sort of intentional forgetting he's a genius. So this picture here, that's me, my cousin James, and his mother on the side, my mother in the yellow, at Stone Mountain, Georgia. The reason I put it in here is because it took me a minute while I started, actually when I was working on a subtlety that I was thinking about, what are monuments? You know, what are these grand places? And of course, I grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, or at least we moved there when I was a teenager. So I grew up in Stockton, California. We moved to Georgia at 13 to the Atlanta suburbs. And then I think in my sophomore year, we bought the house on Walker Road, my dad's choice. And Walker Road was supposedly, although I can't find any verifiable proof, down the street from James Venable Jr., who was the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And our first days in that house, I think we must have moved, I don't know what time of year it was, but I think Memorial Day, there was a Klan rally. And so the American flags were in everybody's mailboxes with info about the Klan rally. The Klan rally at that time was only going up Memorial Drive to the outskirts of Stone Mountain, but they used to spend time in Stone Mountain. You can't see it because it's the big black space in that upper photograph. But from 1915, the KKK rebirthed after Birth of a Nation. Basically, after the film came out, there was a big resurgence, and it started at Stone Mountain, Georgia. So during the Jim Crow era, this was a site of the reification of racist terror, and I could never understand why we were living there. But also, in the way that monuments go, I didn't know that that was all that was happening. I felt a sort of ambient terror, but not the kind that you would imagine. It's part of it is high school, part of it is, being introduced to a kind of, let's say, racial hierarchical structure that I wasn't accustomed to, because in California I had a different set of a very diverse kind of understanding of how we all were, and it was maybe a little bit free to be you and me. It was very very 70s, very, Stockton is kind of an agricultural hub, so you have a lot of people who are working agriculture, and then there's a college town, so you have like a big mix of people intermarrying also. So I just didn't understand that there was a kind of a black and white divide that was very clear. In any case, just to say, monuments like Stone Mountain also fade into the background and become a place that you just go to for family reunions, and you go to for, to hang out with your friends, or you go to watch the laser show, and you think, oh, this is crazy, but you don't think why it's crazy, or, there's sort of an acceptance of the crazy. This is just a detail of this drawing. A couple of years, maybe a year after A Subtlety, I had a gallery show in London, and just to get personal for a minute, I had Ari and I had started going out, and I was like, "Do you want to go to Stone Mountain?" Part of it had to do with this resurgence of investigations around monuments and racist and Confederate monuments and what they mean after the massacre in Charleston. So I said, yeah, well, I grew up around this racist monument. We should go check it out. And he said, yeah, sure, and I'll bring my camera. So I'll bring my 8x10. So there's the 8x10, Stone Mountain. We went out there, met my parents, stood in the heat at 10 o'clock in the morning, and took this monumental photo. And I did just a bunch of drawings and cutouts, and I was just trying to kind of wrestle with it, because it was funny to me that for all the times that I've made work around things being cut out, racist emblems being cut out, it didn't really strike me as kind of obvious that, well, I mean, it was right there the whole time, this large narrative piece. So I threw a few photos in here, a few images of 2D work that sort of happened in between the larger pieces, because it really did start to to bother me that I didn't have a clear take on monuments. And with everything, well, one of the things that happened, this is 2016, this is before the elections, but in Rome, I started thinking about what it is to be in a place that holds on so profoundly to its ruins and how it lives in its ruins to some extent. And even if you build something on top of the ruins, there's this kind of element of, eons of history being sort of unearthed and buried and, living in a palimpsest, on top of one another. So it's it was very present. And I wanted to think about that quality in American life. I'm just going to scroll through real quick. Oops. Some large drawings, just thinking about building things and burying things. I think I skipped one, no, I'm afraid. This one I made a print from also. More watercolors, but in addition, there was a lot of text pieces or a lot of large drawings, and I had a show in Cleveland that was sort of brought it all together. In the meantime, I was approached by the Tate Modern in London to take on the Turbine Hall, which in some ways is kind of like the beast's and the most sort of high honor. It felt like a high honor, like to be approached to do something. And in fact, I had made a joke about it to a previous director of the Tate Modern when he came to see A Subtlety. And it was, let's just say it wasn't the right thing to do. I don't think he said, I think he said something about, where else I could do a piece like this. And I said, well, you've got a turbine hall. I mean, so it didn't happen right away, obviously. Invited out to London. And the way I wind up working is I think I still work like a person who draws. I do draw and I paint and do little watercolors and things and doodle. But there's an element of not knowing until I find something. And it tends to feel like the thing that I found was the obvious one. This is just a sketch. This is not the first sketch, obviously. The first thing I thought of, I don't even know for this piece. I think I was a little bit in a panic because it started to feel very important, like very visible, very important, very like this make or break, like now they'll really see you for what you are, And so we were in London, site visit, looking around, not knowing what to do. And as we were driving, I was in a taxi going back to the airport, and we went past Buckingham Palace, and I was like, oh, and I took a picture of this fountain from the car, like very crooked pictures, and I just thought, oh, it was like, that's my jam, like it was like over bombastic statuary that's so self-important and just like everyone like takes themselves so fucking seriously. Queens, royalty, like what is this bullshit? And so, but I was like, that's the thing. It's like, the Baroque, there's like a part of me that's like, but look at all those like stuff on it. So I took the picture. Didn't think anything of it, went home, spent 6 months trying to invent a piece that would make sense for this. And it was like a world's fair of ideas, just like, it was references that were so kind of far flung in a way, natural history museums and work that I felt like I had seen in other places, and everything felt sort of familiar. And so it was kind of like this breaking down, how to, so I work with drawing, shall I make something? And part of my anxiety in doing things like this this, is that I didn't start out as a sculptor. And I don't think you have to start out as a sculptor to make a sculpture, but I think I developed this hang up, like, well, you don't know what the foundations are for sculpture. Like, I know how to start a painting, but I don't know how to start a sculpture. So I have to like start from the basics. And I tend to do that anyway. I start from like something very elemental, like clay. And so I started playing around with clay. It's like, it's going to have to live in space, so I'll just make these little figures. So I made all these figurines, and then I started to develop. And I was getting into the panic mode because the London people were going to come and see what I was working on. And I needed to have something to show them and have an idea. And it was some little things, little clay. And then I was going back through my pictures from London, and I saw that fountain, and I was like, of course! That was your jam, remember? So that's, everyone always wants to know how an artist makes work, and it's not pretty, it's not, the aha moment is usually embarrassing. But I was thinking as the piece was developing, I was like, of course, water, we're talking about the Black Atlantic, we're talking about the pond, crossing the pond, everything having to do with water and, a Black life and our relationship to it. We're talking about the Mississippi, we're talking about the Tallahatchie, we're talking about the Congo, we're talking about all the waters that have like connected us and taken our lives and swallowed us and we've ingested and that lives within us. And so the piece is called The Fons Americanus, but I call the piece The Daughter of Waters. So it's 42 foot tall working fountain, all built with sustainable materials. My hand is more present in this piece than in any of the others so far. Well, I'd say, the calliope, yes, but clearly I'm working with teams and foundries and fabricators. In this case, a fabrication group called Millimeter in Brighton, where I had a great time. If you ever want to go to Brighton, it's a very cool city, very diverse. So it features the fountain, the main fountain. There's another figure further down the hall, a small shell. We call it the shell grotto with a figure inside crying. And again, I sort of leave the work. It's got elements that are goofy. There's references to art history. There's references to my own psychology. There's references to other histories that we know of or don't know of, but it's sort of meant to be a piece that can be seen or not seen. There's a lot of space around it to just sit, and this is kind of one of the qualities of the public art piece, is like, I invite you to understand more, but I don't expect everybody to, I think that there's a quality of the public artwork that sometimes, or at least this is sort of my hang-ups that I was talking about, that it sort of demands something be important. And the problem with monuments very often is that there's an overdetermined attempt to convey all the importance of the person or the thing or the event that happened, but most of the time people are leaning up against it, waiting for a ride, taking a breather, drinking some water, having a rendezvous, that they exist in other forms and people make of them what they will. And very often, in the case of the monuments that we've been debating and discussing, they became such ubiquitous features in the landscape that their meanings were maybe lost or maybe just absorbed and taken for granted. So opening up the space for meaning to exist or not exist is, I think, part of these projects. some drawings from the pandemic. I just was drawing all the time. The Book of Hours was ultimately a book that I did produce of watercolors. There were many different iterations, but one of the things that I tend to do when I don't know what to do is just sit down very concentratedly and draw watercolors, inks, whatever's at hand. If it's nice paper, that's fine. If it's not, that's okay. I just have to remember to do that, or I'll probably lose my mind. So this is just a selection of those. They sort of live in maybe the opposite space of the public artworks. You know, these are very private aspects of what we're going through, what I'm going through, you know, allegorical images. But in the meantime, after I did, you know, many of these drawings, I guess by late 2020, early 2021, I realized that I needed to try and tackle something just a little bit harder. Harder meaning, like, sometimes if I sit down to make a drawing, I do this and, you know, walk away, and that doesn't count, you know. And I know that I'm getting lazy, so I have to do something with a little bit more heft. It doesn't have to be a lot, just a little more heft. So I thought I'd make a film. And I thought I'd make a film. I've done a few shadow puppet films, but I thought I'd do this one stop motion. And I'm working pretty much alone in the studio up until editing time. And I was basing it a little bit on Lotte Reiniger's Prince Ahmed. This piece is called Prince McVeigh and the Turner Blasphemies. And I was thinking about, I wanted to detail a whole laundry list of incidents of white aggression, past and present, in light of the stealing accusation of certain people. But also referring back to, oh, just one moment, I'll click it. Referring back to a white supremacist fantasy novel from the 70s called The Turner Diaries that I've referenced in other work. And I asked your local hero, Lady Midnight, woohoo, yay, if she would score the piece for me, which she did beautifully. And so here's a section. So the piece goes through a couple of sections, including voter disenfranchisement at the polls and the murder of James Byrd Jr. and a few other things, John Brown's Rebellion, things like that. And with a little bit of a fantasy uptick at the end, because as I was working on it, then January 6th happened, and I was like, oh, I have to include this. I was like, God damn it. Like, so mad. I'm mad on so many fronts, including my own personal front. So I was like, okay, now how do we recognize that and find not a solution, but just like find an uptick? I feel like a lot of the times I leave the work pretty open-ended and a little bit like it's up to you to feel bad now. But I did end it on a little bit of a potentially hopeful note. Moving along, in around the same time that was happening, 2021, 22, 23, 22, I was asked to work on two projects simultaneously. One was with Unji Ju, former Walker Art Center. Unji Ju, who's at the SF MoMA, asked me to think of a piece for the free galleries at SF MoMA. And Hamza Walker, who I've been in contact with for, well, also since 1997, but he had approached me probably in 2017 about working on this project called Monuments. So first I will talk about SF MoMA, because it was very hard to try and work on two things at once, and they were very different. SF MoMA, I was really thinking about, I had a real problem with the space. It was a kind of a showroom space on the street level, a free gallery for the public. But San Francisco had changed since my childhood, when it was the city that I thought I would, move to as an adult. It became a city that's very, very tech heavy, very, very dire. Like a lot of people out of sorts, without homes, with a lot of addiction issues. There was just a lot of desperation on the street, and I kept encountering that, and I couldn't not see it, and also wanted to think about what is this future that's being, imposed on us, and how do I reconcile myself to it? What is my relationship to it? So the image up here is actually an automaton from the 19th century. It wasn't working at the time, but it's sort of a clockwork mechanism that plays the banjo. And this one is at an automaton museum in New Jersey. And then this is ultimately what I created. Part of what I created, the piece is called Fortuna and the Immortality Garden Machine, which features this figure, Fortuna, who deposits these fortunes, an assortment of statements or ideas or thoughts that I wrote. Prayers are blind, this one says. I spent a lot of time trying to put into language what I intended this piece to do or to be, and I've never been satisfied with what I've never been satisfied. I don't think I've ever completed the sentence, but I've sort of, the shorthand for the piece that I sort of settled on, because it seems easier, is that I got COVID like everybody else, and while I was in quarantine, I decided now would be the time to really think about this commission, because I had been struggling with it. And there's no better time to think about a commission than when you have a fever and you don't know what to do with yourself. So I've started thinking about longevity in life and people who want to be immortal. The idea of immortality, I started thinking about the problem that I just told you about San Francisco and this sort of city that has, gradually leaching away its people and its humanity. The Black population has had to move elsewhere. It's had to move to Stockton, for crying out loud, where I came from, because it's more affordable. So Stockton's 2 hours away. It's the bedroom community of San Francisco. But there were just a lot of different associations that I was having, and I think because I had a personal relationship to the museum and to the place, and because I felt something was needed in a way, and I thought what was needed was an audience, and what was needed was an audience that is also the artwork. So I would just make the people who could sort of be a substitute for like the viewer who may or may not exist on the street anyway, and the work itself. So there's 8 of these automatons, and they're living in this space. The area that they're situated in is filled with obsidian, which has magical and physical properties that I think are kind of important. It's, I think, good for taking away negative energies. There's also a seating area, a very plush yellow velvet seating area, because you don't have to look at it if you don't want to. You can just sit down. And each one of the figures goes through a series of actions that seemingly they know what they're all about. It's kind of a clockwork, but the systems that are at play, only me and Noah Feehan, who programmed everybody, knows what they are, the sequences. It repeats, but you'll never see the same thing twice, and the gestures are fairly subtle overall. There's a figure that rises, a figure that seems to be lifting, and each one has kind of an identity. The bell toller, the water bearer, the whisperer who holds a little doll. I like the idea of a kind of a natural history museum, or the idea of the site as a place where humans no longer exist, but these figures, these representatives of a kind of arc of Black life, let's say, from its origins in this country to its future in this country, that they could exist here, perhaps forever. Perhaps they have lived here forever. There's a very kind of slight reference to, and it's really just in the spirit of California, that there's a reference to Parable of the Sower and Octavia Butler. The idea of there being a future or not a future. The idea of a seer like Fortuna who can sort of make pronouncements. And I did like the idea of giving these pronouncements to a public that they could take away and make some kind of interpretation of for themselves. So as this piece was developing, I was also given the opportunity by Hamza to take the recently decommissioned equestrian statue of Thomas Stonewall Jackson, which was taken down from Charlottesville, and to have it as my own to do something with. He and a team from MoCA and what was LAX Art, which is now the Brick, brought me out to New Jersey to see the piece in a secret warehouse where it had been shipped, and gave me a commission key, because you have to be able to ship things places. This is what we learned when you're working large. So we shipped it up to the foundry, the same foundry I've been working with actually for a while now, Workshop up in Kingston. And we started, and I worked again with Mike Kohler, and he's just the best, and we can sit together, and it doesn't feel like, it's definitely not a farming out a artwork situation, because we sat together and figured out how we were going to tackle a piece this large, made of bronze, with lead inside. So I said, well, is it possible to scan the whole thing? Can we scan it? And so we had a scan. We had a digital scan. I had a little model of it in my studio. And then I said, well, I can't really do anything with this model. Can we just look at the digital scans? And I started reading up on Stonewall Jackson. I read a couple of I skimmed a few history books and really kind of settled on his horse as being a major player in his life, and in the narrative that people want to tell. And I can get around to that. This is the pedestal is another question of how to deal with the pedestal, because it's granite and really heavy, and it came in about 6 pieces once taken down. So I wound up using graveyard tools to etch away and create these silhouette pieces. So that's the most kind of Kara Walker-ish gesture I could make for this piece. But the main event really was how to deal with the equestrian statue, and Mike and I basically dissected horse and rider digitally. I had done so on the paper scans that I had, and I was like, okay, we're going to use a diagram of how to butcher a horse. Why Little Sorrel gets this kind of treatment? Why not? He's a player in a game that he didn't sign up for. He's a smallish gelding who gets lionized after the death of his rider, by the people who are holding on to the idea of a lost cause. His fate is after Stonewall Jackson was killed by, it was friendly fire, lost an arm. His arm is buried someplace. His horse was retired, couldn't be taken care of, got put at the veterans' home out to pasture, was trotted out at every veterans event possible until he was old and infirm, couldn't use his back legs. They built a harness for him so he could still be trotted out. And then somebody broke the furnace, or did I say furnace? Oh my God. Somebody broke the harness, and the horse's back legs. He had to be put down. Then, if that weren't indignity enough, they skinned Little Sorrel, stuffed him, and his body is still on display at the Virginia Military Institute somewhere and it's a dusty-looking artifact. Sad, sad, sad. So this quality of never letting something die, never letting the story go, holding on to it well beyond its use date is part of why I wanted to sort of focus on Little Sorrel as emblematic of the idea of the lost cause. So we dissected him and then spent a few months putting it back together in the form that made the most sense. Me and Mike went through many iterations of puzzling the pieces back together to create something that felt like not just a riff or a joke, but like the beast that won't quite die, but has been turned, let's say. So this is a piece that has just come down, or is actually in the process of coming down right now at the Brick. And it was part of Hamza's show. I'm a part of it as a named curator. I think I'm mostly a muse, although I did contribute, and we had many phone calls and conversations around the show. But Hamza, another walker of no relation, that we know of, really spearheaded this project. And if you're not familiar with it, he took a number of the few decommissioned Confederate monuments, some of which have been vandalized, some have been broken apart, and he put them in dialogue with art by mostly contemporary African American artists at the Mocha Geffen, which is a very large space in Los Angeles. And the show is very, very beautiful, very, very touching, actually. There was a lot of anxiety around putting it together. It took about, I'd say, upwards of 8 years of his time, and 3.5 of mine, let's say. And there's a catalog, so if you didn't get to see the show, you should definitely get the catalog. It's comprehensive, and it really gets at the heart of not just what is the lost cause, what these monuments actually meant and were doing in space, in the spaces that they lived in, what those spaces look like now that they've been removed, and what artists have done in the past and are doing and have done more recently to challenge the status quo, the racist status quo. So, and that's the end. Thank you.